A New Mexico mom heads to work on a normal Thursday, but she never makes it inside.
All her stuff is here in the house, but she's not here, and it's just not like her to not call work to check in and take her purse and her phone.
She disappears, leaving behind her car, keys, medication, and both cell phones.
For a number of reasons, I don't think she left on her own.
Months later, her remains are recovered on secluded federal land, where a private investigator discovers a treasure trove of evidence only after the official crime scene is closed.
I think everybody was pretty blown away when they started finding what they found.
And soon her workplace comes to the forefront of the investigation.
Something was going on that we are just not privy to.
This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie. The Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico holds some of America's most restricted information, confidential nuclear secrets that only those with the highest level of security have access to. From what's been reported, Melissa Casias didn't have access to that information. In fact, she'd previously had her security clearance demoted, so to speak. And yet, the conspiracy theory train perpetuates, and perhaps with good reason. For when Melissa Casias drove to the lab on June 26, 2025, she didn't go to work. Instead, she disappeared. Months went by without answers until her remains were recovered on federal land. And that's when the conspiracies really heated up. How did Melissa get to that secluded property alone? Why were both of her cell phones wiped clean and given a hard factory reset? How is it possible seasoned detectives missed loads of key evidence at the scene? What's her cause of death? And above all, is Melissa's death related to the disappearances of other high-profile scientists?
Something was going on that we are just not privy to.
Just 35 miles northwest of Santa Fe, New Mexico, sits the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Founded in 1943, the lab sits atop the Pajarito Plateau, secluded from any bustling city streets or high-trafficked areas. In fact, Robert Oppenheimer chose this location specifically for its isolation back in the early 1940s as the perfect location to develop the Manhattan Project. Since then, the Los Alamos National Laboratory, or the LANL for short, has played host to some of the most high-profile secrets in American history, most of which are so top secret, we the public don't even know about them. New Mexico in general has that reputation, from the conception of the atom bomb to the Roswell incident of 1947 that sparked alien conspiracy theories.
I mean, even going through the UFO files, you see Los Alamos mentioned a lot because I would say in the 1940s, the 1950s, a lot of the sightings were coming from around the Los Alamos, Albuquerque, New Mexico area, and they weren't just being spotted by civilians. They were being spotted by people that worked at Los Alamos that had, a crazy background in this type of stuff, an incredible education. They worked in the Air Force, they worked in the Department of Defense. So I would say, yeah, this is a very well-known, well-respected place that holds a lot of government secrets.
And that begs a major question. Is there something they're not telling us? Could there be hidden secrets in the case of Melissa Casias? Back in 2025, 53-year-old Melissa lived in Rancho de Taos, New Mexico, with her husband Mark and their daughter Sierra. Both Melissa and Mark worked at LANL, commuting daily from their home to the lab in Los Alamos. To be clear, Melissa was not a scientist, but instead an administrative assistant. Here's her family attorney, David Adams.
She worked as an admin assistant in the labs. She didn't have a role as a scientist. Her clearance was limited, so I'm not exactly sure what she had access to.
According to Lauren Conlin, the LA Mag reporter who first broke this story, Melissa had recently lost some of her clearance at the lab.
She was an administrative assistant at Los Alamos, and reportedly she was having some issues at work. I don't know what those issues are, but something did result in her losing her clearance at one point. So I don't know if her family is ruling nothing out, but I don't necessarily think that they think it's connected to classified information because she lost her clearance. I think it could be, a range of things, I guess. She was responsible, for setting up meetings, for documentation, getting that into the right hands. But her family, at least the family I spoke to, they didn't know too much about her day to day. I will say, Melissa was, or seemingly was, per her Facebook, an avid hunter. I believe that at one point she and her husband had a YouTube channel about their hunting excursions, and they had a business. I did do a background check, and I was perplexed at one point about just a plethora of PO boxes. But upon further digging, it looks like she did have a few businesses.
This will come up again later, Melissa and Mark's passion for hunting. But needless to say, it's unclear what exactly Melissa had access to inside the lab. And it's also unclear why any clearance may have been taken away from her. What we do know for sure is that on Thursday, June 26th, 2025, Melissa showed up for work at the lab as usual. But interestingly, she didn't go inside. According to The Guardian, Melissa and Mark carpooled from their home to the lab, as they did almost every day. At about 6:15 that morning, Melissa dropped Mark off before saying she had to work in another part of the campus that day. But instead of reporting to that area, Melissa turned around and drove more than an hour home. Her daughter Sierra reported seeing Melissa at about 7:45 that morning. When Sierra asked her mom why she was home, Melissa said she forgot her work badge. But that alone doesn't really add up.
I also spoke to an employee at Los Alamos. The whole Melissa forgot her badge, so she turned around and went home. This employee was like, I forgot my badge multiple times before. You just go to security and get a temporary badge. So something was going on that we are just not privy to.
Just before 1 o'clock that afternoon, Melissa drives to Sierra's work to drop off a sandwich for her daughter's lunch. According to The Guardian, Sierra said Melissa seemed quiet, but overall normal. Sierra later told Dateline, quote, "She may have been a little more quiet, but still nothing that caught me off guard." Just over an hour later, at 2:18 p.m., a family friend reported seeing Melissa walking alone along New Mexico State Highway 518. She was headed east, carrying a backpack. As the workday came to a close, Mark waited at the lab for Melissa to pick him up, but she never showed. A coworker then gives him a ride home, where he gets dropped off at about 5 o'clock. Nearly everything at home seemed to be in place. Melissa's car is parked in the driveway. Her 2 cell phones are inside, along with her purse, ID, wallet, and daily medication. Everything is where it should be, with one exception. Melissa has disappeared. It's then that Mark calls police to report Melissa missing.
We cannot locate my wife. We haven't heard from her all day from work. This morning was the last time I saw her work. My daughter saw her around 1 o'clock. All her stuff is here in the house, but she's not here, and it's just not like her to not call work to check in and take her purse and her phone.
Upon closer inspection, both of Melissa's phones have been wiped, completely reset back to factory settings.
It looks like her phone has been, my daughter says it looks like it's been reset, but so we looked all around the house, everywhere on our property. We cannot find her or nothing, and I don't know what to do. The car that she was in is parked here at the house. The keys are here. The house was locked. Everything is here. You know what I mean? So she went from the plaza. She came home. The car was here, parked in the yard. The keys are on the kitchen table.
What's her name?
Melissa Casias. And we called the hospital to see, because if anyone, there's no one in there, at all like that, because we thought, well, maybe something happened to her. Her purse and everything's here, so no one would be able to identify her.
And you said what she took was her phone?
She didn't take nothing. That's the thing, is her
anything.
phone and everything's here, and she always takes her stuff with her. My daughter was trying to track her location, and they always track each other. But her phone's wiped. The thing is, what we can't get, and she would never have wiped all the pictures off and all the information off of her phone.
All of these things put together just don't add up. If Melissa was willingly going somewhere, why would she leave behind important things like her ID and her wallet, not to mention her very necessary medication?
It was reported early on that Melissa, when she left, took her thyroid medication, her curling iron, and her toothbrush. I take thyroid medication. I take Synthroid. I've said this before. I need it to live. If I want to live a healthy life, I need that. So why would you take it if you were just, you were planning to take your own life? Something was going on.
Days turn into weeks and still no sign of Melissa. Her immediate family, husband Mark and daughter Sierra, sit down for an interview with NBC's Dateline, where they announce they believe Melissa left on her own. But Melissa's other family, her father and siblings, have a completely different reaction.
Her husband had put out a statement on Facebook saying he believed she left on her own. And I kind of went with that for a minute, thinking, okay, I'm going to respect the husband. I'm going to respect the family. But in the meantime, Melissa's mother, her father, her sister, her niece, they don't believe she left on her own. They don't think that there would be any reason in the world to make her leave her daughter, who was her best friend. Melissa loved being a mother. She was a wonderful mother.
As the family disagrees on what could have happened to Melissa, the wider public can't help but connect the case with those of other missing scientists.
10 missing scientists with access to classified stuff.
This has been making national news for months. The number now surpassing a dozen people, either missing or dead, all who had involvement in the world of defense, nuclear research, and space. In April, the House Oversight Committee officially demanded information from the FBI, wanting to know whether there's any real connection between all of these cases. And with that, the conspiracy theories online have run rampant, from UFO cover-ups to foreign intelligence espionage and a calculated attack from Russia or China. And while none of this has been proven, it still leads to the question we're all asking. Is Melissa's disappearance related to those other missing scientists?
It's hard to say no because there's commonalities. I mean, the state of New Mexico itself, I'd say, is a big commonality here. And the fact that, there have been another employee specifically that went missing. He was retired from Los Alamos, but he went missing. Melissa missing. General Neil McCaslin, I mean, he had connections to the Department of Defense, of course. He worked there. He went missing in New Mexico. I mean, I could keep going. It's just like I have a hard time here because I did hear from the New Mexico State Police last week, and this is pertaining to McCaslin. This was, I heard on Friday, they said to me, there is nothing currently to support General McCaslin being linked to any other missing scientist. And I was like, oh, you seem very sure about that. Have you spoken to other agencies? Have you, what's going on? And I asked specifically, have you spoken to agencies in Los Angeles, Los Alamos? All they said back was, yes, we've spoken to other agencies. And at the moment, we don't see any connections. At the moment, I don't know, but they won't get into it.
The family attorney, David Adams, has a slightly different take.
My opinion, initially, before being involved and seeing that many people involved on the list of scientists around the country or folks that have worked for labs, that yes, there seemed to be some strong correlation of that many people going missing and having that have a major impact on this case because she worked for the national labs. But then after getting involved and learning more, I don't suspect that it's part of some larger conspiracy. I will say that on the local side to it, that there have been a number of calls that have suggested some local conspiracy in the governmental side of things. And when I say conspiracy, individuals that have called alleging people being paid off in certain situations. And I don't believe in anything until you see it and you can corroborate it yourself. But some of these calls have led to additional rabbit holes, so to speak, in terms of investigations that we've done that would make me want to dive very deeply into some of these local conspiracies that have been suggested. So our hope, of course, is that law enforcement does talk to those individuals so we have a clear understanding as to whether or not the information they can provide is accurate.
Bottom line, could there be a bigger conspiracy here? Maybe. If the factory reset cell phones and prescription medication don't hint at something suspicious, the location of Melissa's remains really set the conspiracy theories into overdrive. On May 28th, a hiker walking through a secluded part of the Carson National Forest comes across a shocking scene. Along the McGaffey Ridge area, the hiker discovers human remains, and next to them, a handgun. What's more, this area is not heavily trafficked. In fact, it's off the beaten path altogether.
This hiker that found her, I said, is this specific area, these coordinates, is it heavily populated? No. It is very, very remote. I even got chills saying that. Very desolate, because Carson National Forest is millions of acres. It is like, I think I saw, or and when I was researching, it's like 2 or 3 times the state of Rhode Island, this national forest. And this specific area where she was found, it's remote. Let's just put it that way. You can access this area through Highway 518 where Melissa was last seen walking. So this area can be accessed that way, but again, you got to go pretty far. It's not right off the highway by any means at all. So it's baffling.
And the location of Melissa's remains wasn't just a random national forest. In fact, it was on federal land.
Finding her body and finding how remote she was, and how those that went up there would probably say it would be nearly impossible to go up there without having assistance or without having water, food to get you up there because of the terrain being so difficult and so remote. And then to have that terrain end up being federal land, is also unique in itself.
On May 30th, the New Mexico State Police makes the announcement, writing in a press release, quote, "Through coordination with the Office of the Medical Investigator, OMI, the individual has been positively identified as missing person Melissa Casias. The cause and manner of death have not yet been determined. The remains will undergo further anthropological examination by OMI." But here's where things take yet another turn. On June 1st, Melissa's family releases this statement. It reads, quote, "We confirm that the remains found in Rio Chiquito are Melissa. There will be more information to come, but what we can tell you now is she was located in an area previously searched. This is a lot to process. Our hearts are heavy, and we fully intend to continue to pursue answers for justice." And that is a huge bombshell. Melissa's remains were discovered by a random hiker in an area that was already searched. It was around the same time that Melissa's family reached out to David Adams for help.
I was retained by the maternal side of the family, the parents of Melissa and the sister, and I've investigated a lot of prior murder cases, specifically missing murder Indigenous women cases in the past. And I'm a prior federal prosecutor that focused on just crimes against women as well in my past job. So oftentimes I present at conferences around the country, and in one situation, an investigator was at the conference and connected me with the family. And I learned pretty quickly that just based upon the things I'd seen in the investigation, that I could be helpful in trying to have some oversight on it and hopefully try to build some momentum to have the right things done, since it was still an active investigation.
In June, private investigators went back to the area of Carson National Forest where Melissa's remains were discovered, and no one could have expected what they uncovered.
Yeah, so what happened is that law enforcement contacted the family after Melissa was found and provided the coordinates as to where she was, and indicated that the crime scene was open and released and there was nothing else to be done. So the family, along with a Four Corners search and rescue team, went up to the area to just kind of see where she was last, not expecting really to find anything. And I think everybody was pretty blown away when they started finding what they found, including, bones, of course, that a dog, had at least gave indication that it could be human bones, based upon the training of the dog, but that'll be determined by the anthropologist. And the paper itself, some things that we identified as being possible biological material, blood in the ground, her clothing, seemingly that was also in shreds. There were some parts of the clothing that appeared to have possible blood in it as well. A shoestring up there. A wrapper is up there as well. And so every single thing that could put some type of DNA analysis and attached to somebody or something, I think is super, super important in cases like this when otherwise there isn't any other evidence. So that crime scene is vital.
Well, it's pretty concerning that this evidence was not recovered by the New Mexico State Police, specifically because additional bones were found. I mean, they had dogs there as well. I was told by a family member, and they were sniffing out the bones like they were human remains. So there's that. There was clothing. They are going to test this clothing. There was blood on the clothing, apparently. I actually don't think I put that in my story. I think this is a new piece of information here, because I did speak to a family member after, and yeah, there was blood on the clothing, and then additionally there was ripped up pieces of paper nearby. And Melissa's sister, they were kind of comparing the handwriting to some of Melissa's at home, or I think that her niece had mentioned Melissa had written her some cards or whatever, and they were like, this looks like Melissa's handwriting. So the search team obviously is very professional. They bagged up that evidence as they were supposed to, and they gave it to the lawyer who turned it over to the New Mexico State Police. So reportedly, or supposedly, I should say, the police are now including this evidence in their investigation with the OMI in determining the cause and manner of death, because, I mean, we both know it should be included.
On the scene, investigators found what they believed to be additional bone fragments, multiple strands of hair, some articles of clothing, and mysteriously shredded pieces of paper.
I'm definitely very curious to see how the forensic anthropologists, and their findings from OMI assist in that as well. But just the fact that there was paper found in her vicinity that was either torn or shredded or cut, whatever might be the case, and to have it be as clear as it was 11 months after she went missing, given the fact that there's so much rain and snow in that area, it seems highly unlikely that paper would depict that writing so clearly after that long.
I have asked a lot of questions here. Like, I followed up with the Casias family law firm, or the law firm they're using. It's Parnell and Adams, I believe. And I'm waiting to hear back, because I want to know, how close was this to the tree and the coordinates, like where she was found? Are we talking yards, feet? What are we talking? Like, I mean, I want to know, was the clothing strewn about? I have a lot of questions about how this all, how this was all found. Of course, I want to see the blood on the clothing. I want to give it to our friend Joe Scott Morgan, who can, kind of determine a possible pattern. But I haven't heard back yet.
Just finding, all the additional evidence that was found a week after the crime scene was closed, and after a thorough sweep of that area was done, certainly raises just additional red flags of one thing that I've at least identified, that I can't say for certain because I haven't tested it, but there appears to be some type of tobacco pouch, for instance, that was left up there. Various types of hair, not an expert, but certainly look like different types of hair, and in some situations even look like animal hair. And so all of that, every little clue you can find at a crime scene is super helpful, and can be the key piece of evidence later that identifies somebody that may have been there. And so to have that forensically analyzed is so unbelievably important.
So how is it possible that diligent investigators just missed all this evidence around the first time?
So I reached out to the New Mexico State Police on Monday, and, before this, I had been very impressed with their response time. They were quick. They were engaging with me. They were saying, it was the PIO I was talking to, and she's like, I'm getting all these answers for you. And this was about a week ago, when I first reported about there being no projectiles in her skull. But I saw all of this info, and I was like, oh no, I got to know why they missed this. But it's like you said, I mean, maybe they didn't think it was important, but I don't know why. Maybe they were, and again, this is just speculation. I don't think law enforcement works like this, but maybe they saw the scene and they said, suicide. We don't need to do anything further. I mean, right? Especially when you had the narrative for a very long time that Melissa, quote, left on her own. So I feel like all of this maybe told police, oh, I don't need to investigate further.
This kind of goes generally to law enforcement across the board. There's a long history, unfortunately, of not properly investigating and prosecuting crimes against women. There's, most of that history is documented in the Violence Against Women's Act in terms of, number one, the disproportionate rates of violence, but the fact that 1 out of 3 women will say that they've been abused in their lifetime. And then you have to think about the underreporting side to it. All of that lends itself to being more mindful that we have to be more trauma informed when doing a lot of these investigations. And in my experience, when somebody isn't doing those initial investigations the way they should be in the beginning, you certainly aren't going to see great investigations when it comes to missing and murdered individuals from our communities be top investigations as well. And so I think the initial side to it is just that I think there's a lack of compassion truly in how the investigation was conducted. And I think it's reflected throughout the investigation. I myself have received phone calls from individuals that have stated that they've left messages on the tip line hoping for callbacks, not necessarily a smoking gun type of information, but certainly information that would be valuable in conducting a complete investigation for a case that made national news when it came to somebody that went missing that worked at some federal labs. And so there's certainly an expectation that this should be done with way more thorough expertise when it comes to the crime side to it. But nonetheless, given the fact that she was working at an area that has been of national attention in many different past occasions, you certainly would want to pay attention to it. And frankly, given the fact that she was found on federal land and had that job, I would have suspected and hoped that the FBI would have been involved at least in some of the initial investigation. And to my understanding, they weren't involved in going to where she was found and hasn't been doing a whole lot in this case. And I would have hoped that they would have been more involved given those factors.
Beyond just this new evidence, there was reportedly contamination of the crime scene from first responders.
There was an orange peel, which was obviously also an initial red flag. And we later learned that law enforcement had indicated that that came from somebody in their law enforcement team. Having been a prior prosecutor and having reviewed lots of different crime scenes, I certainly don't want to have any type of contamination take place at a crime scene where anything is left nearby. My hope and expectation, just as the general public's expectation should be, is it's clean of any debris left behind by law enforcement, so it just doesn't cause any issues. And so at least we can say for certain that law enforcement would say that that orange peel is theirs.
The good news is that all this new information has been provided to law enforcement, and the investigation into Melissa's death is still open and ongoing.
Initially, law enforcement response was that, wow, this is surprising because we think we've got 95% of all of Melissa's remains with us. And so it was surprising to see anything found up there because I understand that there was at least 7 people from the law enforcement team that had investigated this crime scene, which I think they would all attest to being super tired and worn out by the time they got there just because of the actual terrain to get there. But it's definitely concerning that they were a little nonchalant about all the belongings found up there, like it wasn't so significant. And having reviewed cases where families have been deprived of that opportunity to really forensically analyze materials that have been found at crime scene, and how that could definitely cause a situation where you don't get justice or accountability, you just don't want to see any mistakes. And so, the way that I understand the analysis should be taking place is that some of those findings will be provided to the Office of the Medical Investigator, and some of those findings will remain with law enforcement for them to do another analysis. But most of it went to OMI. In fact, I had contacted the attorney for OMI just to make sure that there was a clear understanding that this was found and that they were going to be taking this in as evidence as well. And so that did take place, and they did come and gather all of the evidence and take pictures of that evidence at the office.
I did not confirm that myself with the OMI, but per the law firm, they believe that this is all going into, the same evidence storage for testing with the gun, with her bones, etc.
I would think that the forensic analysis of that firearm will also have some indication as to whether or not it had been outside for a very long time, because there will be some wear and tear, possible rust on the firearm if it had been sitting outside in those conditions for that long.
There also has to be testing of blood, and this goes back to the reports that we talked about earlier, Melissa and her husband being frequent hunters. According to Lauren, Mark's hunting boots could be a new piece of evidence.
And I just started going through the police report, and I am seeing that, the police took in camouflage boots of his that had blood on them, but they're hunters. Like, this is a hunting family. So it's, we haven't seen the results of this blood come back at all, but I'm willing to bet that it's probably animal blood, but you never know. You never know.
But the next question here becomes the timeline. We're still waiting on autopsy results and the cause and manner of Melissa's death. Is there any sort of indication when this information could be released?
And that is one thing I did ask the law firm. I just said, do you have a timeline at all about the OMI results? And he said nothing, but he didn't say this specifically, but he kind of hinted it could be longer because they gave the police new evidence to take into consideration when doing this.
We have no idea on timing. Given prior experiences, we really should be seeing some initial reports and findings from OMI and law enforcement within the next 30 days, hopefully.
And while all of this new information came to light because of some private investigators hired by Melissa's family, there's also been some drama involving high-profile PIs, too. On June 16th, an 8th District Court judge granted Mark Casias a temporary restraining order against private investigator Thomas McNally. According to local news outlet Taos News, Mark alleged McNally has been targeting him and his family since April of this year by a, quote, escalating campaign of public harassment, defamation, and criminal threats. During a hearing last month, Mark told the judge, quote, Your Honor, just to give you an idea, I'm not on social media anymore. Just the harassment and everything that went on was too much. So some of the stuff that's coming in, I'm getting screenshots sent in to me, but we're getting screenshots every day. Taos News reports that McNally allegedly harassed Mark on social media and in text messages, saying Mark murdered his wife. McNally also allegedly contacted Mark's work, published his financial records, and even urged the public to keep watch on Mark and Sierra by using untraceable cell phones. On McNally's public Facebook page, Emerald Eye Investigations and Consulting, he allegedly wrote, quote, No one is safe, Mark. Confess your sins. On June 16th, Judge Emilio Chavez granted the temporary restraining order, saying, quote, The conduct alleged is not an isolated incident, but constitutes a continuing course of conduct involving repeated communications, public accusations, threats, intimidations, and unwanted contact directed toward Mark Casias and his family.
So Mark Casias was granted a TPO by a New Mexico judge against Thomas McNally for, I guess it was online harassment mainly from what I saw. This private investigator was retained by Melissa's family, her mother, her sister, and her niece. And by the way, they are no longer working together. Actually, the PI decided that he just couldn't kind of move forward with the investigation as it was at the time. But yeah, he was accusing Mark Casias of a lot of things. He was putting out a lot of information on his Facebook page. Mark Casias said he was threatening him and his daughters from a previous marriage, threatening their life. When Mark had sent him a cease and desist, he apparently, went online and kind of just ramped things up a little bit. And then when it came time to, have this virtual hearing about a possible TPO, McNally didn't show up. Now, he says it's because he was improperly served or he never got it. But I think a judge saw that and he's like, you know what, I'll grant this until at least September. But, McNally wasn't necessarily barred from talking about the case. He was just barred from, pointing fingers at Mark. But needless to say, I don't think he'll be doing any additional work on it.
The investigation into Melissa's disappearance and death is still ongoing, and we still don't have a lot of answers. But for those closest to the case, there are still things that simply don't add up.
Keep in mind, they found Melissa's remains on the 28th. They confirmed it was her by the 30th through dental records. And then it wasn't until the 1st that they did the initial scan of her skull and they determined there was no projectiles. So my assumption was that with the thought in mind that she left on her own, which by the way, I do not think she did. With that in mind, well, I'll tell you, and with the gun nearby, maybe they just said, oh, it looks like a suicide. Well, for a number of reasons, I don't think she left on her own.
I certainly, from my perspective and everything that I've seen, I certainly suspect that there's foul play in this case. I think that given the nature of Melissa, period, in terms of the day before she went missing was her 20th anniversary, 3 days prior was her daughter's high school graduation, and given how her family and community knew her, that this was something that would never be part of her life, where she would disappear or consider committing suicide. So those initial red flags, of course, were huge. How her phone was left behind, and both of the phones having all the information deleted, certainly was also suspicious. Not taking any medications with her or anything like that, wherever she was going at the time. All the red flags were there in the beginning.
In fact, the theory that Melissa ran off to end her life could have clouded the judgment of investigators from the jump.
The speculation that it could have been suicide, I think, is something that most people tend to do under circumstances where there hasn't been a lot done to determine whether or not there is any foul play. And so I certainly would never recommend that an unattended finding of a body, that suicide be the first conclusion. Not too surprising to me that the CT scan, which at this point I just speculate on because I have not seen that report, so I can't say for certain if that is the case, but obviously there's been some findings released that indicate there is no indication that there's any gunshot wound to the head. And all that means to me is that there's a different cause of death that we should expect to see in the findings from OMI.
As I start to go through this police report, I do believe that there could have been a little more urgency at the beginning if family members, immediate family members, like Melissa's husband, maybe put a little more emphasis on find my wife, she's missing, not I think she went off on her own type of thing. I think that's, and even if you think that is fine. You have your reasons. That's fine. But if I'm law enforcement, I want to dig further. I want to know why, you know what I mean? I want to know every single avenue of this case. I want to explore everything.
Meanwhile, those closest to the family say they're experiencing a wave of emotions as each day passes.
I think they are just beginning a whole new chapter of grief now that she has been found. It has taken that last hope that they had that maybe she would be out there and alive and that she would return home someday. Now I think the grief has turned into accountability and justice because of what they believe to be lots of red flags in this case as well. They are anxiously waiting some type of conclusion when it comes to the forensics of this case, to where they could really start healing, knowing that if there is somebody that's involved and that this was a homicide, that they're brought to justice in this case. And I think that will really open the doors for them to begin the healing journey. Otherwise, this has been an extremely emotionally exhausting time frame for the family.
I think they're just trying to be really careful with everything. I think they are confused. And like I mentioned, they have been so frustrated and sad about having to defend Melissa against these she left on her own allegations, just because they know her character and they just know that she wouldn't do that. So I think that, they haven't even had time to grieve. I will say that, in finding Melissa's remains with a handgun nearby, where everybody's brain, who possibly doesn't think about, the Los Alamos connection or anything else, their brain goes to suicide. And that's just devastating for the family because they know she wouldn't do that. They know she wouldn't do that. They know that there's more to this story. So I just, for their sake, I hope that we can get some answers so they can, take the proper time to grieve.
As the investigation is still open and ongoing, a tip line is still out there just waiting for new leads to come in.
thereafter, obviously, there was a tip line and there was a lot of information being sent in from the community. And there's a lot to go through in that. And certainly when a kind of case like this happens, you're going to have lots of conspiracy theories, and you might have information that's not relevant or helpful at all. But there were a lot of people that have come forward that have provided information that would suggest that this was not her doing. And every single one of those people should be talked to and should be, looked at and look to see if there's any concrete evidence to support any of the things that they speculated on as well. In my mind, there's usually a checklist in place for these types of cases, and you should be going down that checklist with a fine-tooth comb to make sure you've covered every possible loose end or circumstantial evidence that could lend itself to a conclusion in the investigation. And from what the information that I've seen and have listened to, there are definitely individuals involved that I would talk to and try to get some answers to explain some things that have been suggested by folks that have called in a tip line.
If you have any information about the disappearance or death of Melissa Casias, contact the New Mexico State Police. But for some, like Lauren Conlin, it's clear that something more is at play here.
Whoever, if anyone else was involved, which I do believe that somebody else was involved, they knew what they were doing. You have to think about that, or if they had any control over Melissa, because remember, she had 2 phones. They were both set to factory reset. I have to speculate someone had her do that. Someone made her do that or instructed her to do so.
And that's where today's scandal leaves us, with the mystery of Melissa Casias' death and disappearance, just that, a complete and total mystery. If you like what you saw and you want to see more or connect with me on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram at Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.